If you're listening to CNN, MSN Now, or other NBC channels, you definitely get the impression that the U.S. market is collapsing, that stocks are crashing. So what's going on? Almost the same thing that happened during the Great Depression. So it's exactly brokers and investors who are jumping out of high-rise windows because they can't bear the shame of going bankrupt. Actually, that's not quite true. In fact, I'd say it's not true at all. It wasn't Ivanov who lost at soccer, it was Rabinovich who won at preference. The S&P 500 and NASDAQ closed at new all-time historic highs on Wednesday. In 2 weeks, the indexes have recovered almost all the losses related to the war against Iran. By the way, this was reported by the same CNN that during these 2 weeks kept shouting that the stock market would never recover. Well, never say never. I want to tell you 4 stories. They happened in America literally this week. Each of them is a separate story, but together they form one picture. And that picture isn't very good. Well, how should I put it? This picture is familiar to each of us who came from the Soviet Union, and an incredibly socialist one at that. The picture goes like this. Someone who has received too much power never gives it back voluntarily. It only passes them on to the next master. But let's start with the Middle East, because of course all eyes are there today. And we'll start with the people whom the Lord once chose. The history of the Jewish people is filled with tragedies that almost wiped out God's chosen people, who were called by different names at different times: Hebrews, Judeans, Jews, Israelites, Judah, and simply kikes. But you see, the fate of this people is drawn in such a strange way that after almost every tragedy, something happened that gave hope and opened new opportunities for these unusual people, whom God called a stubborn and rebellious tribe. A tribe. Stiff-necked, that's how it's said in Russian, right? Maybe that's why he loved them. How do we know? So Mordecai refused to bow to Haman, who planned to exterminate all the Jews across the vast Persian Empire at that time, what we'd call Iran today. Haman's associates cast lots to decide on which day exactly to kill the Jews, and the word for lot in Persian sounds like pur. So when instead of the Jews, Haman and his associates were killed, the Jews started calling the day the holiday of Purim. Well, in Hebrew it should actually be Purim, of course, yes, but Purim means the day of the lot, the day of the lot. In the middle of the 20th century, a terrible catastrophe occurred, which is simply called the catastrophe. The systematic extermination of 6 million people simply because the blood of the chosen people ran in their veins. Germans, Ukrainians, Poles, Lithuanians, French, many other peoples not chosen by God slaughtered, killed, raped, burned in ovens, buried people alive, taking great pleasure in the work of their own hands. Half of this very stiff-necked people survived, and as a result, most of them returned to their rightful lands, which God had bequeathed to them. That's how Israel came to be modern Israel. On October 7th, 2023, Hamas militants armed and trained by Iran and Russia killed 1,200 people in Israel and took 250 hostages. Major universities in Europe and America saw demonstrations in support of Hamas, calling for the killing of Jews, not those far away in Israel, but students attending these institutions. Millions of people around the world rejoiced and celebrated when they learned that millions of Jewish children were being thrown into ovens. Again, just like after the Holocaust. Pregnant women had their bellies cut open and men were beheaded. This day became a major holiday in parts of the Christian world and the Muslim world, especially in the Shiite world, by the way, where people have for many years been calling for the complete extermination of another 6 million Jews who came to the land that, according to the Shiites, God gave by accident and by mistake. He was just drunk. But from this tragedy, something grew that many years later would be told as yet another miraculous deliverance of the chosen people. Hamas is defeated, Iran is destroyed, Syria has expelled its ruler, Russia has practically lost its levers of influence, and it seems that now the process of resolving the issue will now begin to broaden. By expansion, I mean, what's it called? Agreements, accords. That is, resolving the issue with the Hezbollah group who are based in Lebanon.
A historic opportunity is now unfolding in the Middle East. Israeli sources tell Fox News that negotiations between Israel and Lebanon could lead to Lebanon joining the Abraham Accords. It's still early, but after direct talks in Washington earlier this week, President Trump posted on Truth Social last night, quote, trying to give a little breathing room between Israel and Lebanon. The two leaders haven't spoken in a very long time. For 34 years, this will happen tomorrow. All right. While Israeli ground forces continue to operate in southern Lebanon, Hezbollah is still launching rockets and drones across the border. There is optimism in the region about the possibility of these direct talks leading to an agreement to normalize relations between the two countries.
If Lebanon joins the Abraham Accords, it means that the terrible catastrophe that happened in 1923 will turn into a relief for the Jewish people, at least for some period of time. It's very difficult to imagine this lasting forever, especially knowing the previous history, but every day of respite is already great. Who knows, maybe Trump is that long-awaited Messiah in an incredibly strange form. First of all, he's not skinny. Secondly, he's not bearded. Thirdly, he doesn't wear rags and doesn't walk barefoot on the sand. But who said that the image of God's messenger has to match our fantasies?
A significant development as President Trump... In an important development, President Trump announced that the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon will take effect at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, midnight local time. And this is important for a number of reasons. This speaks to the broader goals of the Trump administration aimed at expanding the Abraham Accords, as well as the success of the Trump administration's negotiators over the past year and a half in bringing greater stability to the entire region. It's important to note one thing here. What we're seeing now is a clear advantage. These are direct negotiations taking place between the Lebanese and Israeli governments. The president also wrote on Truth Social that for the first time since 1983, when Ronald Reagan was president, he is inviting the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and the President of Lebanon, Joseph Aoun, to Washington for direct talks aimed at developing peaceful relations between the two countries and expanding on the dialogue that took place earlier this week in Washington at the ambassadorial level, mediated by Secretary of State Mark Rubio. Hezbollah and the Lebanese government are no longer as closely connected as before. In the past few hours, we have seen sirens sounding all over northern Israel as the Iran-backed terrorist group launches drones and rockets across the border into northern Israel. The Lebanese government is separate, but this highlights Israel and Lebanon's shared goal to disarm Hezbollah and work toward peaceful relations. And the president announces that today at midnight local time at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon is to take effect.
When I arrived in Israel, which was, 52 years ago, my mother's cousins, who were born in Israel, told me how they used to travel from Haifa to Beirut for entertainment. They would leave early Saturday morning by train, arrive in Lebanon, and spend all of Saturday, overnight, and part of Sunday there, and then return back. They said it was an open resort-like place, filled with restaurants, bars, cafes, boutiques, a little Paris. Even in my time, the Lebanese told me that they didn't know which country would sign the first peace agreement with Israel, but the second one, they said, would definitely be Lebanon. Honestly, I haven't met more friendly representatives of the Arab world towards a Jew, except maybe for the Bedouins. The Bedouins and also the Druze lived perfectly well next to or within the territory of the Jewish state. But after U.S. President Jimmy Carter and his national security advisor Brzezinski removed the Shah from Iran and set off an Islamist firestorm in Iran, as they said, Lebanon was practically taken over by Islamists, destroyed, brought to a medieval state, and became a staging ground for Russia and Iran to attack the Jewish state. Thank God and Trump, this era seems to be coming to an end. The best thing that could happen is if the Israeli army, together with the Lebanese army, disarms Hezbollah, the Hezbollah leadership is put in prison, and the rest are offered a chance to live a normal life. Because you see, now a huge reconstruction will begin in Lebanon, not the Soviet perestroika, but a rebuilding of everything that was destroyed after many decades of devastation and nightmares. The restoration of life will begin, and of course the Jews will gladly take part in this.
Subtitles We are deciphering the nuclear deal that no one anticipated. Russia wants it, the US said no, Iran is not ready to give it to anyone, and a small Central Asian country may end up possessing the most dangerous material in the world. The United States of America proposed a 20-year moratorium on uranium enrichment. Iran, in turn, made a counteroffer, setting a much shorter, definite period, only 5 years. As a result, the agreement quickly collapsed. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because deep in the wreckage of those very negotiations lies the most explosive subplot of this entire conflict. What is happening with the uranium? The United States also strongly urged Iran to completely remove all highly enriched uranium from the country. The Iranians said they would agree to a controlled process of diluting it instead. In other words, Iran is saying we will dilute it here, on our land, under our control. The US says no, it must leave the country, period. This gap is not just some detail of the negotiations. This gap is the whole war. So who will win? The candidates are fascinating, as are the geopolitical games being played around each of them. Vladimir Putin enters the stage. He proposed transferring Iran's enriched uranium to Russia as part of a peace agreement, but Trump refused him. Why? On paper, the Russian proposal seemed quite acceptable. Russia is already a nuclear power. Russia stored Iran's low-enriched uranium under the 2015 nuclear deal, which makes it one of the few countries with the technical capability to handle such material. They have already done this before. They have the necessary experience. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov went even further, stating that Moscow's participation in this process could take various forms. This includes processing highly enriched uranium into material suitable for use as fuel, or transferring part of this uranium to Russia for storage, while strictly respecting Iran's right to enrich uranium exclusively for peaceful purposes, and so on.
It seems reasonable, it seems neutral. In reality, it's neither.
Just think about it. Putin is simultaneously providing military support to Iran while also offering to take control of its nuclear materials. Washington has already officially acknowledged that Russia provided intelligence to help target American troops in this region, in the Middle East, during the war. Handing Moscow the rights to control Iran's most strategic asset in the midst of an active conflict in a region where Russia is already seeking dominance is not non-proliferation. And importantly, Iran itself is also not ready to hand over these materials to Russia. The official representative of the Iranian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Esmail Baghei, stated that their country has not yet reached that stage. Thus, both sides simply said no to Moscow. It's astonishing.
Moscow is trying with all its might to get in the middle and somehow make itself an important part of this conflict again, and therefore an important part of the Middle East. In the Kremlin, I think they perfectly understand that the Americans will never agree to this. I mean, never. But for propaganda purposes, in order to look like peacemakers, they keep offering their services all the time. It's absolutely the same as inviting a cat to babysit the mice while the parents go out to have fun.
Here is where Kazakhstan enters. This is exactly where Kazakhstan comes onto the stage. And this is the option that the most serious nuclear non-proliferation experts are quietly pointing to. Why? I'll explain it to you now. The IAEA manages a nuclear fuel bank on the territory of Kazakhstan, which is intended to be used as a reserve source of low-enriched uranium of reactor quality. Kazakhstan is already playing this important role in the global nuclear architecture. It has the infrastructure, it has relations with the IAEA, and most importantly, Kazakhstan has signed an agreement with the IAEA to host the low-enriched uranium bank, specifically to help strengthen the security of the international nuclear fuel cycle. And back in 1994, the American Armed Forces removed about 600 kilograms of weapons-grade uranium from Kazakhstan to the United States. This was part of an operation called Project Sapphire. This was done in order to remove nuclear materials left after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and it was fully coordinated with the authorities of Kazakhstan, as well as with the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA. This has happened before. Kazakhstan has already found itself in such a situation. It knows very well how this works and has no interest in the Iranian-American conflict. A neutral transfer under the control of the IAEA with mandatory international verification is probably the cleanest of all possible solutions at the moment.
Well, now let's move on to what has just happened in the United States of America. The first story. Prosecutors are showing up somewhere. Where exactly? You'll find out now. I think you'll be interested to learn how America's chief financial controller, the Federal Reserve, spends our money. Washington prosecutor Janine Pirro, that's Janine Pirro, visited the headquarters, that's right, the Federal Reserve. Pirro said that any construction project with an 80% cost overrun from the original budget deserves serious scrutiny. And these people, she said with a hint of sarcasm, are former hosts, that's right, of a show on Fox. These people are responsible for the monetary policy of the United States. Trump has already pointed out several times that the new Federal Reserve building was initially priced at least twice as much as it should have cost. And now there have also been cost overruns that nearly doubled the cost. That means 4 times more money has already been spent than was needed to build, renovate, and put any building in order. Accordingly, suspicions immediately arise. What kind of suspicions? Well, especially when we're talking about billions, right? The suspicion, as you understand, is very simple. They're stealing. In common language, it means to steal. So they're robbing us. Gewalt. The visit of the prosecutors, well, Pirro's people in the Federal Reserve probably in Russian, right? This is possibly the first serious attempt in 100 years to at least take a look under the hood of an institution that Mises and Hayek called the source of systemic distortion in the economy. The source of systemic distortion in the economy. So, the Fed probably, yes, the Fed. Since 1913, it has been operating on the principle of, guys, trust us. We know better than anyone, so we won't even tell you how we operate. So, an 80% overspend on their own building is a perfect metaphor for how the Federal Reserve manages other people's resources, other people's money, without market discipline and with a monopoly on printing it. Hayek, in The Denationalization of Money, showed that as long as there is a state monopoly on issuing money, there will be inflation, crisis, and corruption. Now, thank God, technology has now brought us to cryptocurrency. Maybe this will start to fix the situation somehow. Now look, the words Federal Reserve System do not appear in the Constitution of the United States of America. It's not there. Why? The Federal Reserve was created in 1913 at a club on Jekyll Island by a group of bankers who then appointed themselves as managers. Ludwig von Mises, in his book The Theory of Money and Credit, which was published in 1912, by the way, a year before the creation of the Federal Reserve, already proved the following. After it was already published and became popular and people started studying it everywhere possible, they said, why don't we organize something completely opposite? When the state gets a monopoly on the issuance of money, it inevitably starts to abuse it. Amazing, isn't it? Not because of bad people in charge, but because of the incentive structure itself. The Federal Reserve is the only player in the economy that's allowed to create money out of thin air. Creating an asset out of nothing, that's what it's called. It's an asset, the money that's in your pocket. Friedrich Hayek wrote a book in 1976 called The Denationalization of Money. He argued that the only way to stop inflation and economic cycles is to take away the state's monopoly on money. So, gentlemen, it seems that inflation happens because of what we came up with in 1912-1913. We need to allow different currencies to compete. Cars and computers compete, after all. I understand it sounds a bit strange. How can money compete? But that's how it is. They already compete. It's just that we limit this competition, so we always end up with, well, a kind of leveled-out economy. A percentage overspend on buildings is not a scandal. This is a small visual model of how these guys manage the dollar. If they can't stick to a construction budget, why does anyone believe they can manage the money supply of a country with 340 million people? I emigrated from a country where the State Bank of the USSR printed rubles in exactly the same way. They promised stability in exactly the same way, and yeah, they ended up the same way too. The difference between the State Bank of the USSR and the Federal Reserve is not in the nature of the institution. No. The difference is in the speed of degradation. Second story. The Department of Justice. It's no longer about financial justice, but rather a political weapon, which of course concerns us all. So on Tuesday the 11th, on April 14th, the U.S. Department of Justice appealed to the Federal Court of Appeals to overturn the convictions for seditious conspiracy. This is the most serious charge in American law. The leaders, that is, of the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. These are all the guys who are connected with the alleged storming of the Capitol on January 6th, 2021. On the same day, the acting Attorney General instead of Pam Bondi was Todd Blanche. He defended Trump's public practice. The president personally, from the podium and on social media, names people whom he believes the Justice Department should investigate. So Blanche said that Americans should be happy that the president is personally involved in sensitive Justice Department cases. And that's where I have a problem. For someone who grew up in the USSR, that phrase sounds something like this: Comrade Stalin.
Интересуется вашим делом.
The General Secretary took the process under his personal control. This isn't the rhetoric of totalitarianism, it's its technical definition. This is totalitarianism. Ludwig von Mises wrote in his book Bureaucracy that when a government agency gains discretionary power to choose whom to prosecute, that agency inevitably becomes an instrument of political action. Together. Not in 10, 23 years, but immediately. I understand Trump very well, who was persecuted. They tried to make his life a living hell. Naturally, he wants to respond to all those who did this to him. But from experience around the world, we know that if you retaliate, the other side will inevitably hit back. And then you respond to them, and then they respond to you. And this will go on endlessly. Trump must tell himself that he has no right to interfere. The only thing he can do as head of state is demand a report from his subordinates on what is being done to restore the rule of law in the country. And let's be honest, because honesty is the main principle of critical thinking. Under the Biden administration, the Department of Justice was used as a political tool. The same FACE Act, the law protecting clinic entrances, was mainly used against conservative activists under Biden. Now, the Trump administration calls this a typical case, a typical example of weaponizing the law against conservatives. I'm deliberately not taking sides in this story, in this particular political clash, because from the perspective of science and freedom, both sides are showing the same thing. Trump, who was conceived as a neutral arbiter, has turned into a club that the new occupant of the White House picks up every 4 years in January. Frederick Bastiat, In the Law, a book from 1850 that reads as if it was written yesterday, formulated this perfectly. He wrote, "The law has become what it was supposed to prevent. Instead of protecting property and liberty, it has become an instrument of their legalized plunder. This always happens according to the same pattern. First, the law is applied to the bad ones, hate speech, and then to the inconvenient ones, and then to everyone in general." Ayn Rand added one important thesis to this. In Atlas, she wrote, "There is no such thing as an exception for the right people. If the law can be applied selectively, for example, not applied to Hillary Clinton, then it ceases to be a law. It just becomes a list of enemies." Story number 3. Remember? Doge. The third story is more complicated than the previous two. I ask you to listen carefully because here we will need real critical thinking. The same critical thinking my new Roadmap to Freedom channel course focuses on. The very first act of Trump's second administration was the effective dismantling of the United States Agency for International Development. This agency had existed since 1961 and employed how many? Well, more than 10,000 people. It was involved in so-called humanitarian aid, fighting epidemics, and supporting education around the world. Elon Musk headed the new institution with the telling name Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. In early February 1925, Musk wrote on his social network, "We spent the weekend feeding USAID into the shredder. We could have gone to some great parties. We did this instead." So, on April 14, 1926, a book was published by the former head of the USAID Global Health Department, someone named Nicholas Endrick. It was called Into the Shredder, well, borrowing the terminology from Musk, Into the Shredder, a whistleblower report on how the Trump administration tore apart USAID. And there's a detail there that seriously caught my attention. So you'll be amused now. When Endrick was giving a presentation to the new Trump appointees about the agency's work, the USAID Chief of Staff said, "I had no idea you were doing all this here. I thought USAID was just, well, abortions." That's the Chief of Staff. Can you even imagine what was going on there? According to the latest data, more than 400,000 federal employees have left their jobs since Trump took office. Well, and most of this early exodus was caused specifically by DOGE decisions and reviews. Now, critical thinking. Let's try to turn it on. Here you need to keep two thoughts in your head at the same time. It's terribly difficult. It's hard to hold on to one thought, but two are impossible, and both are true. The first thought. From the point of view of Mises, Hayek, and especially Milton Friedman, foreign aid through the state is wrong, bad economics. Friedman called foreign aid, quite humorously, a subsidy from the poor people of a rich country to the rich people of a poor country. Once again, a subsidy from the poor people of a rich, well, very wittily, country to the rich people of a poor country. That is, money that the taxpayer didn't want to give to anyone is taken by officials and sent somewhere, where it's stolen by the rich people of the country it was sent to. Poor countries. Buffetti would say, money that isn't backed by voluntary exchange always distorts both the donor's market and the recipient's market. That is, here it's taken away by force, and there it gives an opportunity for embezzlement. Just wonderful, but there's no real purpose. Some kind of purpose, I don't know which one they set. It's not achieved this way because there's a law of bureaucracy that Galambus formulated brilliantly. Any initiative by bureaucracy ends with a result that's exactly the opposite of the goal they set. The second thought, which is no less important, the way this was done is not the method of a free republic, it's the method of a coup. I understand that at the very least it started with a coup. An agency created by Congress is being shut down by a presidential decree. It's already strange, right? The work is being done by a group of 20-year-old programmers with no experience in the humanitarian sector. One person, not elected, not confirmed by the Senate, posts on social media, "We fed his agency into the shredder." If today the president can close a congressional agency with a single decree, tomorrow he could use the same decree to do something completely different. And that might not be in our best interests. There might be another president, but he can do it too. Paine, Thomas Paine, in the dramatic sense, wrote, "Any power that you temporarily entrust to one person for a good cause remains at the disposal of the next person, and the one after him, and the one who comes 8 years later. And from your point of view, anyone could come. Not a very good person." My conclusion for the viewer: you can be in favor of reducing USAID and at the same time against the method by which it was done. These are two positions that do not contradict each other. In fact, this is the position of a supporter of freedom. Well, and the fourth story is Big Brother. Right now, as I speak, there is a dramatic vote taking place in the U.S. Congress. What's at stake? The extension of the surveillance program known as FISA, or Section 702. What is it? Section 702 allows the National Security Agency to collect the electronic communications of foreigners without a court order. The problem is that Americans regularly get caught in this net as well. Their correspondence, their calls, their messages, without a warrant, without notification. Because they wrote a letter to a foreigner. Gentlemen, that's how the FBI started going after Trump's election campaign, to be continued, just so you understand, right? The program expires on April 20th. Trump is demanding that the House of Representatives pass a clean extension for 18 months with no changes, no reforms, no warrant requirements, no restrictions. That's what's amazing. See for yourself. In April 2024, when Biden was in power, Trump wrote in capital letters, and I quote, "Kill FISA." It was illegally used against me and many others, and I completely agreed with him. Kill FISA. Today, in April 2026, Trump writes about the same FISA. When used correctly, that is, when we, our country, use it, it's an effective tool to protect Americans. Well, that's normal, right? What has changed in these 2 years? Only one thing has changed. Everything is now in Trump's hands, and not in the hands of his opponent. This is a pure, sterile textbook case of what Lord Acton warns about. In general, he wrote about this in the 19th century, right? Power, he wrote, corrupts. Power corrupts. Later, they added that absolute power corrupts absolutely. But, so to speak, that's not about us now. Now, power corrupts. But it corrupts not only those who wield it. It corrupts us. It's our perception of the very principle of power. We start to think that the problem is about who holds the tool, and not that the tool exists at all. The Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was ratified in 1791. It states the people's right to be secure in their persons, the inviolability of homes, papers, and property from unreasonable searches. No warrant shall be issued without probable cause supported by oath. Well, I can add to that nobody really knows what this probable cause actually is. That's why it's written so poorly. And it's not very precise either. And as we've discussed, for those of you who sometimes listen to or read my talks related to the outer map to freedom, probable cause is basically, I don't know. But what does that even mean? Jump twice, stomp your foot, whistle, and something else? Well, it doesn't matter, at least that much. There you go. Supported by oath. Well, it's like, I believe in God, so I won't swear by his name, right? I swear on my mom. FISA 702 is a legal loophole around this amendment. Even this amendment with holes in it. Not a repeal, but a workaround. And here's what I want to say directly to my audience. We know what government surveillance is. We lived in a country where every district party committee had a department that read letters. We know what it was called, operative technical measure. The technologies used by the KGB and the technologies being used now, well, maybe the level is different, but the principle is the same. The justification is the same, national security. The victim is the same. We are people, private individuals who are just doing our own thing, not suspecting that someone is reading our correspondence. Thomas Paine wrote in Common Sense that government is at best a necessary evil and at worst an intolerable one. Here, I completely agree with him. I don't know of any best case. It's just the worst. The only protection from turning one into the other, from a necessary evil into something intolerable. These are constitutional limits that, it should be noted, protect citizens specifically from the government, not the government from the citizens, as other countries' constitutions have tried to do. Specifically, citizens from the government. Well, all right, let's move on to the conclusion. 4 stories from 1 week: the prosecutor's office versus the central bank, the Ministry of Justice against its political opponents, and then against outsiders. The executive branch shutting down a congressional agency with a single decree, surveillance being extended under the same pretext and by the same politician who, 2 years ago, demanded its cancellation. What unites them? The same thing. The American Republic, conceived by Madison, Hamilton, and Jefferson as a system of checks and balances, today usually works like a pendulum, not like a Swiss watch, but like a pendulum. These are different things. Every 4 or 8 years, one clan grabs the lever of power from another, and each clan uses these levers much more aggressively than the previous one. And the levers are surveillance, prosecution, money issuance, executive orders. They are becoming more and more powerful. Hayek called this the road to serfdom, and he warned, "The road is always paved with the best intentions." Security, justice, efficiency, national interests. Each step down this road is justified on its own, and each step makes the next one easier. Is it possible to get off this road? Yes. But only if the citizens themselves, not parties, not candidates, not movements, but these citizens, understand one simple thing. After that, they will act somehow, but first, just once. Freedom is not a gift that the authorities give us in exchange for surveillance. Freedom is something that the authorities are obliged not to take away from us. If we ourselves cannot distinguish this, no constitution, no court, no elections will save us. That's exactly why I'm making this channel. That's exactly why I wrote the course Science of Freedom. Freedom is knowledge. Without knowledge, freedom cannot survive. If this video made you think, hit the bell, subscribe, share it with someone you care about. For those who want to support the channel on a regular basis, there is a paid subscription for $4 a month. It's not much, but it allows me to do these analyses regularly and in more depth. My course, The Science of Freedom, is here on the channel for free. And remember the main thing. Thinking is not a luxury, it's a survival skill for a free person. A person. This was Leon Veinstein, Science of Freedom. See you next time.